Hello and welcome to today's podcast, where we'll be discussing an important and controversial topic. Is capital punishment a cultural practice or a human right violation? I am Mohammad Ali and I am here with my co-partner Mohit Kumar. How are you, Mohit Kumar?
I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, good. Okay. In the first part of this podcast, I'll be arguing that capital punishment is best understood as a cultural practice, rooted in specific cultural beliefs about justice and morality. After that, you will present your argument against this view, arguing that capital punishment is in fact a violation of universal human right. To wrap things up, we'll be responding to each other's point and after concluding perspective. So offer a concluding perspective. So let's get started. Okay, so I'll be going first. Let's dive into why capital punishment is best understood as a cultural practice rather than a universal violation of human right. Capital punishment, when practiced, reflects a society's cultural beliefs, values, and justice. Different societies influenced by historical, religious, and moral norms, interpret justice in various ways. It is therefore culturally relative. We can't judge every society by the same ethical standard because each society's view on punishment are shaped by its own cultural context. Cultural relativism, one of the key theories in anthropology, is cultural relativism, introduced by Franz Boas. Cultural relativism is the idea that we should understand cultural practice within their own context rather than judging them by the standards of another culture. Capital punishment is deeply tied to the values and moral system of each society, and it is viewed differently in cultural context. Take for example Islamic countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, where capital punishment is seen as a moral necessity rooted in Islamic law. The concept of qisas or retributive justice dictates that the punishment for certain crimes should be equivalent to the crime itself. In this context, if someone takes a life, the punishment is the taking of their lives. It's not seen as a human right violation, it's seen as a restoration of balance. The death penalty here functions as a ritual that reaffirms the community's commitment to justice in line with religious law. Similarly, in Japan, where the death penalty still exists, the justification isn't rooted in revenge but rather in the cultural values of social harmony and responsibility. Japan's use of the death penalty aligns with its emphasis on maintaining order and enforcing a strong social fabric. In this case, capital punishment is not viewed as cruel or inhumane, but as an essential tool to protect society's integrity. To further support my point, I'll be presenting another anthropological theory to you, which is structural functionalism. From a structural functionalist perspective, developed by Emily Durkheim, capital punishment serves a function in society beyond just punishing an individual. According to Durkheim, punishment serves to reaffirm society's shared values and moral code. Capital punishment acts as a ritualized responses to crime, reaffirming societal norm and maintaining social order. It's not merely about revenge or deterrence, but about restoring moral order within the community. In countries like United States, where the death penalty is still practiced in several states, the justification often revolves around the idea of retributive justice and deterrence. While some may critique this as unfair, it's important to understand that the American legal system views capital punishment as a necessary response to particular heinous crimes like murder or terrorism. It, it serves a purpose of moral closure for society. especially for the families of victims. Let me present you another anthropological theory, symbolic anthropology. Additionally, symbolic anthropology associated with scholars like Clifford Geertz helps us understand capital punishment as a symbolic act. In many cultures, the death penalty is a highly ritualized and symbolic form of justice. The rituals surrounding executions, such as final statements and last meal, are not just about punishment but about affirming cultural symbols of justice and reaffirming the community's collective values. Capital punishment is not inherently a violation of human rights. It is a reflection of the culturally specific beliefs about justice and moral order in each society. The cultural diversity in justice system shows the complexity of viewing capital punishment universally. It's about understanding the values that underpin these practice, not merely condemning them from an external perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Ali, for your points. I believe that it's somehow culturally belief, but it serves a basic human violation. How can you treat a person? How can you kill a person who is a mother or a father or a sister to someone else for just a crime? He can be sentenced to life imprisonment also. I will be starting this to support my point by showing you or telling you about human rights perspective. The right to life at the heart of this debate lies on the fundamental human right to life, a principle that is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially in Article 3, which states, everyone has a right to life, liberty and security of a person. This right is universal and applies to all human beings, regardless of their culture, religion or society. Therefore, any practice that deliberately takes away a person's life, whether through execution or other means, can be considered a violation of these rights. Let's take another example by supporting with a theory which is called ethical universalism. The anthropological theory of ethical universalism advocates for the idea that there are universal principles of human rights that should apply to all people. Human dignity and right to life are cornerstones of human rights, and these cannot be overridden by cultural practices. While cultural relativism encourages understanding within cultural contexts, ethical culturalism calls for protection of fundamental rights that transcend cultural boundaries. Now let's see it according to the issue of irreversibility. In many cases, capital punishment is irreversible. There have been numerous instances for wrongful convictions where innocent people have been sentenced to death, only to be better executed through new evidence or DNA testing. The mistake is permanent. When a person is executed, it is impossible to undo the action, even if that person is later found to be innocent. The irreversible nature of death penalty is one of the most significant ethical concerns. Now let's take an example in Pakistan of Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He was the Prime Minister in 1973 and was hanged to death for his crime that was declared innocent around 6 months ago. So is this fair in your point of view? I believe this is not. Now let's move on to the disciplinary application. Furthermore, capital punishment often disproportionate affects vulnerable populations. Studies have shown that it is frequently applied unfairly, with racial minorities and poor being far more likely to receive the death penalty than others. In United States, for example, black defendants are more likely to sentence to death, especially if the victim is white. This highlights the discriminatory nature of death penalty, which is often a tool used by those in power to maintain control and perpetuate systematic inequality. Now let's move to the violence begets violence. Another issue is that capital punishment often undermines the moral integrity of society. Violence begets violence, and by permitting the state to engage in killing, society sends a contradictory message that it is acceptable to a state to kill in the name of justice while commending individuals for doing the same. This moral contradiction weakens the ethical foundation of any society that practices it. Lastly, to support my point, the argument that capital punishment acts as a deterrent has been shown to largely ineffective. Numerous studies shows and suggest that there is no conclusive evidence that the death penalty deters crime more effectively than life imprisonment. Therefore, the justification for using the death penalty as a deterrent is not subsistent by the data. While I understand that capital punishment may have a cultural significance in some societies, it is impossible to justify the death penalty from a human rights perspective. The right to life is universal and cannot be violated based on cultural practices or beliefs.
Thank you, Mohit Kumar, for your points. You really shared some thoughtful points and important issue and addressed important issue, and you gave a really important example. But I still believe that capital punishment is not necessarily a human right violation, and we'll address your points. But first, let me give you an example. In New York, in I think 1972, a man named Shock Ross was convicted of manslaughter. He killed two children, and when he was arrested, he was imprisoned to 14 years. He served 14 years in prison. And even though the crime was severe and many people believe that he should have served more, he was released after 14 years. But when he was released, after a short while, he again started killing. He then killed 11 women. And when again he was arrested, he was again imprisoned to 250 years. But then, due to natural reasons, he died in 2008. Now let's address your point. You argue that right to life is universal, and I totally agree with that. Every human life is valuable. However, we must understand that different cultures have varying perspectives on what justice means. In societies like Iran and Saudi Arabia, the right to life is still respected, but the right to justice is also a core value. The death penalty in these societies is a form of moral restoration, not killing. It reflects a moral code rooted in religious culture and beliefs. While wrongful convictions are indeed a tragic reality, the human right issue is about ensuring fair trials, proper legal representation, and safeguard to minimize error. This is an issue of justice reform, not necessarily the abolition of capital punishment itself. If a society can guarantee a fairness of its legal procedures, capital punishment could be practiced in a more ethical manner. Regarding the claim that capital punishment disproportionately affects marginalized groups, I agree that discrimination in the application of that penalty is a concern. However, this is more a problem of legal inequality than of the practice of capital punishment itself. If the legal system were reformed to ensure fairness, capital punishment could still play a role in societies where it is deeply ingrained. The idea of violence begetting violence is a valid concern, but I would argue that capital punishment in many cultures is seen not as a violence for violence sake, but as necessary act of justice to restore balance. The key is to understand the cultural and ethical framework in which these practices are carried out.
Thank you, Mr. Ali, for the rebuttal. While I respect your perspective, I still believe that capital punishment, regardless of cultural context, is a violation of human rights. The right to life is a fundamental human right that cannot be overridden by cultural beliefs or legal traditions. Human rights are meant to be universal and inalienable, principles that should stand above the influence of shifting cultural norms or judicial practices. Accepting exceptions to this principle undermines the every foundation of human rights protection worldwide. I also agree with you that justice systems need reform to prevent mistakes, but the irreversible nature of execution makes this issue far more complicated than just ensuring fair trials. No system is infallible, and the history has shown that wrongful convictions do occur, sometimes decades after an individual has been executed. In such cases, apologies are meaningless. The finality of death leaves no room for rectification, which makes the risk inherently unjustifiable. The moral contradiction of violence begetting violence still stands as a major issue. How can a state claim moral authority while simultaneously engaging in the act of killing that it condemns in its citizens? Capital punishment, even under the guise of justice, sends a deeply troubling message that some lives are not worth redemption and that retribution takes precedence over rehabilitation or understanding. This is especially troubling in diverse societies where systematic biases, racial, economic, and otherwise often influence who ends up on a death row. Even if capital punishment is seen as part of cultural value system, we must still ask whether a society should be in the business of legally killing people. Culture is not static, it evolves, especially as we learn more about human psychology, systematic injustice, and the potential for change. The fact that a practice has roots in tradition does not make it immune to moral seniority. If anything, traditions that evolve irreversible harm must be examined more critically. A truly just and ethical society must prioritize the sanctity of life, the potential for transformation, and the fallibility of its own institutions. In the end of my part, the question is not only about legality or cultural heritage, it is about what kind of society we want to build. One that responds to violence with more violence, or one that upholds life even in the face of its gravest challenge.
Thank you, Mohit Kumar, for raising some great points. Even though we both have different views on the same topic, but we both should agree that capital punishment is a very complicated thing, and we both care about saving lives. While I do agree that wrongful conviction is a bad thing, but I think it's more of a legal system and not necessarily a capital punishment for it. If we can find a way to give fairness, fair justice, and legal safeguard, I think we can practice capital punishment more ethically.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Ali. You are very much right that basically it is a very complicated topic itself, and it depends on the states, like you mentioned, Iran and Saudi Arabia. So it's basically the state itself that how its legal system is being written and constituted. If a region is claiming that it's serving a people fairly, then it should be like people who are criming, who have a severe crime should be executed by the death penalty. But if the person who is innocent and is executed and is labeled as innocent after his execution, that is irreversible. So that's, I guess, our end of podcast. Thank you for having me. So good
Thank
to meet
you.
you. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for watching.